Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, A Little Bit of Everything with Erin. It is Tuesday, and typically we don't do makeup on Tuesdays, but Monday I got home from running some errands, and next to my driveway was a box from Wet n Wild. I did order the new 40 palette that they came out with, so I wanted to review it and compare it to the Morphe by James Charles palette. Now, I did go on my Instagram a couple of hours ago and ask if you guys would want swatches in natural light or in studio lighting, and as of right now, 67% of you said to do it in the studio lighting, so that's what we're gonna do. I'm just gonna go over a couple of swatches now, but if you wanna see the full 40 swatches, I will have that at the end of the video for you. We'll also do an eye look. We're gonna do one eye Wet n Wild, one eye James Charles palette, and we will use the similar colors. I do wanna make you aware that the Wet n Wild palette, as of right now, is $19.99 plus shipping on their website. However, I think this is a special offer pricing. I believe the pricing is going to go up when the whole fiasco first started on Twitter with the comparisons of the two palettes. Wet n Wild was saying that the palette was going to be priced anywhere between $25 and $28. Now, again, I don't know if the $19.99 is going to stay, but that's what it is as of this moment. There are 40 different shades in this palette. You have a mix of mattes and shimmer shades. And for reference, here's the Morphe by James Charles palette. Obviously, it's going to be messy because I've used it a lot. There are 39 shades in this palette with the larger pan sizes here in the middle. And then you have, again, a mix of shimmers and mattes. Now, James Charles has been quoted to say that he helped formulate these colors, helped make these pigments. He had a lot of hand in what colors were going to be in here and where they were going to be placed. So he is a bit upset that somebody duped him. I do want to point out that there are a lot of dupes before Wet n Wild came out, and that's just the name of the game in the makeup industry and, quite frankly, in fashion and everywhere else. Okay, so I do want to point out that not all the colors are the same. What you saw on Twitter and Instagram was an image that was kind of far away on the table at, I believe it was at DragCon. So it looked similar to James' palette, and it is still kind of similar, but on closer review with both palettes next to each other, you can see that there are shades that are not actually the same. I also want to note that this came with a clear plastic piece to protect the colors in the mail. There are no shade names on the palette. There are no shade names on the back of this as well. I do wish that they numbered them, kind of like how ABH just did the Norvina Volume 1, 2, and 3, where they have a letter and a number. I did really like that. I kind of wish they did that in this as well. James' palette did have names on all the shades, but they put it on the plastic protector, so I ended up just taping it to the top because I do like to reference the names. So the first one we're going to go into and show you a comparison of is the color that James is very fond of, called Skip, and that is a bright pink. And you may know that that one stains the eyes from somebody else's video. Now in the Wet n Wild palette, that shade is not as bright. It's more of like in between that and the pale pink, which I think he calls pinkity drinkity. So with a clean finger, I'm just gonna pick up the Wet n Wild one, and that's really soft. And that's it on my finger. And we're just gonna place it on my wrist here. And that's on my wrist. And now I will pick up the James Charles one. And that's that on my finger. And we'll place it right next to that. So you can see the difference already. The James Charles one is brighter. Not all the colors are the same as he was first thinking. So I will go into another one. One of my favorite colors in the James Charles palette is actually called Playground, which is this bright ass blue right here. And they don't have that in the Wet n Wild palette. The one that's in that spot would be this tealish color. So we'll take those two just for comparison purposes. So this is the James Charles one, which is kind of chalky, but it's a blue, so it gets a pass. And then the Wet n Wild one. All right, so in James' palette, we have this shimmer shade called Halloween. Which is this bronzy orange note here. And we'll swipe that on my arm. And then we will take the similar color in the Wet n Wild palette. That's very soft. And that's it on my finger for reference. And I don't think the James Charles one is a little darker, but they both look good. All right guys, so I had to rush off to work. I'm home now. We are going to do a look where we take similar colors from both palettes and do one eye James Charles, one eye Wet n Wild. I'm gonna prime my lids with my ColourPop concealer as always. And then I decided, so nobody gets lost, the white under that eye means James Charles palette and the brown under this eye is Wet n Wild. We're going to start with the Wet n Wild eye, and we're going to take this purple and we're going to just stamp that and then blend that out on the eye. So I was about to take the deep purple from the James Charles palette, and then I realized by looking back at the Wet n Wild one that they don't have a deep purple, so I'm gonna go ahead and take the other purple. It's in the same area as the purple that I took from the Wet n Wild palette, so that's what I'm gonna stick with. So we're just gonna do the same thing. We're just gonna stamp that in, and then we'll just buff it out. So for the first eye, for comparison, they both went on well, good pigment. The color looks pretty much the same. Dipping back into Wet n Wild, we're going to take that pink shade at the end and buff out the purple we put on our crease. And then we'll dip into the same pink over on the James Charles side and do the exact same thing. Now just for some contrast, I'm going to dip into the black in the Wet n Wild palette and just make that the outer V part, like I said, just to get some good contrast in there. And then we'll go ahead and do the same thing with the James Charles palette. So far, every color I've picked, it's been in the same pan area. I was going to go with the shimmer shade in the purple, but the pan that's in the James Charles palette is a dark one, and the one that's in this one is a light one. And in the James Charles one, where the dark shimmer is in the Wet n Wild, they have the matte deep purple. So I think I'm just going to go with the deep shimmer purple in the James Charles palette and the deep purple shimmer shade in the Wet n Wild palette, which is in the different pan area. But just to make sure everything is still even and cohesive, that's what we're going to do. Now I always spray my brush with some setting spray when I pick up a shimmer, but I'm going to try both of them dry first and then spray them if I need to. So that's what it looked like picking it up dry, and I'm just going to apply that to my lid. And I don't see anything. That's kind of bad. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that setting spray and spray the brush and see what happens. So we picked up more with the wet brush, and there's a little more on there this time. And it is very, very, very opaque. I had lots of thoughts at this moment. So I really dug into the pan, and oh my god, I found the pigment. So yeah, if you're going to use that purple shimmer from the Wet n Wild, you need a wet brush, and you gotta dig a little bit. So we're going to take that same exact brush. This one is clean, was not used. And starting with dry, we're going to try to pick up the one from the James Charles palette. And you can see it's on the brush dry. And we did get a little bit of pigment, but I'm just going to spray this with setting spray. So that is it with some setting spray on it. And let's try that again. And I dug like I did the Wet n Wild one, so they're very, very similar. Spraying and digging seems to help with those. So this was the finished look with the eyes. Tell me what you guys think down in the comments below. Keep on watching if you want to see all of the swatches. Alright guys, we're going to do swatches. I'm going to do it out down my arm. I'm going to take one from the Wet n Wild palette and from the exact same pan and the exact same row from the James Charles palette. I will take one from there and put it directly next to it. And I have a clean towel on my legs, so I am constantly wiping my fingers and checking them before I use them to make sure there's no contamination and that the color is true. So we're going to do the first row all the way up my arm with both palettes. This one I'm going to go in for a second one. I didn't feel like I got enough on there. I want to thank you guys for being here with me today to do all these swatches and compare these two palettes. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to my channel. Please give this video a big thumbs up, share it if you want to. That always helps me out and I appreciate it. If you hit that bell, you'll get notifications anytime I post new videos. And if there is a palette you wanted to see, let me know down in the comments and I will get that. Do you plan on buying the Wet n Wild palette, or are you going to stick with James Charles? Let me know that too. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on this. Thanks for watching, guys. And here we go with row 2. My poor arm. Let's dive into row 3. And now we're diving into row 4. And finally, row 5. Just before this ends, I do want to leave my final thoughts. I thought both palettes worked well. They both have their flaws where they're kind of chalky, some are a little too soft, and some of the shimmer shades are extremely opaque when you try to blend them versus when you just do the finger swatch, which is one of the reasons I hate finger swatches because it doesn't really mean much. Now, which one would I prefer to buy? Honestly, I don't know. I'd probably go with the Wet n Wild one again, only because of the price point. It is under $40. So, I mean, right now as it stands, it's $20. So I don't have to, spend the $39 to get the James Charles palette when most of the colors are similar and work the same. If you're a big fan of Morphe and James Charles, obviously that's who you're going to buy from, which is great, and there's no problem with that. But if you've always wanted the James Charles palette and you have not been able to afford it, this is going to be very similar for you, and this is a good price point for you. Alright guys, I'll let you finish watching these swatches.